Awesome. Okay, thank you guys so much. Welcome back. My name is Haley Pickard, and I am part of Bashyam Shah Immigration Law Group. I have with me today Murali Bashyam, who is the managing partner, and Allison Lukanich, who is another immigration attorney with our office. So today we're going to be talking about 4 years in review, looking back at the Trump administration and what we've seen, how that has affected immigration in the past 4 years. We have these two lovely immigration attorneys with us to give their feedback and kind of what they've seen both from the business immigration side and the family immigration side. So thank you guys for joining us today.
Thanks, Haley. The question is, do we really want to review the last 4 years or not?
And it hasn't happened.
That is for sure. So to start it off, kind of looking back, in Trump's first State of the Union address on January 30th, 2018, he outlined his administration's 4 pillars for immigration reform. So 1 was a path to citizenship for dreamers, 2, increased border security funding, 3, ending the diversity visa lottery, and 4, restrictions on family-based immigration. The 4 pillars reinforced Trump's campaign slogan to buy American, hire American, and 2017 executive orders by the same name, and tracks with the previously outlined immigration policy. So just to kind of set it up, I know it's been a while, but just looking back at what did they initially say was going to happen. So one of his first acts as president was an executive order, which among other things, significantly increased the number of immigrants considered a priority for deportation. And under this, such an immigrant can be considered a priority to be removed even if convicted only of minor crimes or even if merely accused of such criminal activity. So Allison, I know that you do the deportation for our office. So what have you seen and how have you seen this affect your clients, especially in court?
So what the Trump administration did was really made every immigrant in the United States a priority for deportation if they had fallen out of status, if they had been convicted of a crime or any other, if they never had status in the first place, they were undocumented. By doing that, in my opinion, he's actually kind of brought the deportation machine almost to a halt because he has flooded the courts. He has, there are simply not enough immigration judges. There are not enough courts. There is now more than, I think, 1.2 million people waiting for immigration hearings. And it's just, when you try to deport everyone, when you make everyone a priority, really nobody ends up getting deported except the very low hanging fruit. So it's something that I follow closely, of course, because it does affect my clients and wanting, waiting times and what to expect. I have hearings scheduled now through 2025, believe it or not. So I know exactly where I'm going to be on particular dates 5 years from now, which very few lawyers, I think, can say outside of the realm of immigration. But all he's doing is he's flooding his own agencies, these own federal agencies, DHS, ICE, CBP, and making it almost impossible for them to effectively do their jobs when they have to account for that many more. I believe the backlog pre-Trump was either 500 or 600,000 rather. So he's about effectively doubled the number of people waiting for hearings going through that process.
And effectively right now it's going to be kind of a 5-year wait at least for people? Is that kind
of?
Well,
it depends. I mean, it depends on where you live, what your court of jurisdiction is. I would say the Charlotte Immigration Court. So in 2015, 2016, someone who entered the country was filing for asylum. That whole process would take maybe a year and a half. Now I am just now this year having trials for people that entered in 16 and 17. And now again, COVID has affected some things, but now trials are being pushed out where people are having their initial asylum trial, their individual hearing 5, 6, 7 years after they entered. And it's worse in other jurisdictions. Now it's better in some jurisdictions that aren't as flooded, but it's worse in a lot of others in major cities, Boston, New York, San Francisco. I mean, the backlogs are astronomical.
Isn't this kind of like what we're seeing in a number of different areas with immigration over the last 4 years, where there's a push basically to kind of cut immigration down, I know you were telling me earlier, deportations under Obama were still fairly high, but now the numbers are higher, but the actual acts of deportation or removal are lower, right?
Right. So, and that's what Obama got the nickname of being the deporter in chief because of his very aggressive policies in getting undocumented immigrants out of the country. But he established, I would say, pretty effective priorities of who would be targeted. So these agencies had standards, and they had, okay, we're going to go after people who are convicted of felonies. We're going to go after human traffickers. We're going to go after, drug smugglers. And they did that. And so others that weren't a part of those priorities, who were working, a lot of whom had work permits, were paying taxes, were doing everything right, were simply allowed to remain, because the government does have limited resources. We had, for two of Trump's 4 years, we had a Republican controlled Congress in the Senate and the House. So with a Republican president and a Republican Congress, you would think they'd be able to pass some reform, that the Republicans would write some bills. The president, of course, would sign off on them, but that didn't happen. Why didn't that happen? Because it just became a nightmare of everyone was going after everyone. No one could agree on who should be priorities or where we need to spend our money. And then nothing ends up happening except these backlogs keep growing.
Mm-hmm. So another thing that the Trump administration had talked about was a limit in legal immigration and limits on guest visas. So have you guys seen that, the limits on legal immigration and guest visas?
Yeah, I mean, at least from, my side, doing employment immigration, certainly, I think the overall numbers are down by half, over the last number of years under Trump. And back to the numbers they had back in 1987, when our population was a lot lower,
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously that's not healthy for our country. And that's not just by chance. I mean, there was an intentional effort on the employment side, especially, and on the family side, to reduce these numbers. And the Trump administration basically did whatever they could, whether it's through executive orders or through changing little things from a policy standpoint internally, like, telling the USCIS adjudicators to nitpick every single case that would have been approved very, very easily, 5 years ago, or even 10 or 20 years ago, Having done this for 25 years now, I've kind of seen the progression of things. Immigration used to be an area where it was a lot of fun from an attorney standpoint to actually practice immigration law and help clients and help immigrants who are happy to come to this country. Over time, especially over the last 4 years, it's become what I call the 3 H's, headache, heartache, and high blood pressure. Yeah. And I think we all have that now. But they're intentionally trying to deny cases. The RFEs have gone up, requests for evidence have gone up by over 50% on the employment side, and even the cases that are so straightforward that probably a 3-year-old kid can look at this case and go, you know what? A CEO qualifies as an executive for an L1 application. You don't need to RFE this case. They have hundreds of people, who they're supervising, or thousands, whatever. Why are you RFEing this case? Those cases are running into issues, and it's all just red tape. And I think I read somewhere that even USCIS adjudicators, I think their retention rate has gone down quite a bit. I mean, there are a lot who are quitting, and they're quitting because the job is not fun anymore, and they're asked to nitpick every single case that they already know should be approved without the RFE or without the nitpicking. And it's not a good situation. I mean, even USCIS right now, which is a fee-funded organization, I mean, they're basically broke, and they're trying to raise fees to raise money to keep the organization going, and it shouldn't be that way. And the reason it is that way is because the Trump administration, and specifically Stephen Miller, with the Trump administration, they've intentionally gone after this issue to actually reduce immigration. And you know what? Unfortunately, they have accomplished it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and just adding on to that, when we're talking about quotas and numbers, I think it's important to kind of explain that those are all set by Congress. So when we have our kind of separation of powers in the country, the legislative branch, which is Congress, they write the laws. It's the executive job, the president and his cabinet, to enforce those laws. So when we talk about quotas and numbers of visa availability, that has not changed, because again, even when we had a Republican controlled Congress under Trump, no one could agree agree on anything. There were a couple different immigration reforms thrown around. There were some bills written, but nothing ever made it for a final vote. So the numbers have not changed. But what this administration is doing through Stephen Miller, which is Trump's like chief immigration policy advisor, they are changing the regulations. So that's the only thing they can control. They can't control the law. The laws have really been the same. There was the major immigration reform in 1980 that kind of set what we have in place today. Then Clinton in 1996 kind of added a lot to it, actually made it a lot worse for a lot of reasons that we won't get into. But that system has been in place for the last, 40 years. What they're doing is they are kind of reinterpreting what the laws on the books are to take away things like discretion, to make things, if you've been arrested and charged with the DWI, for example, to kind of make that a pitfall or make that something to eliminate giving this person who otherwise qualifies for the visa, reinterpreting, job descriptions and prevailing. I mean, that's what he's doing. So the laws, and a lot of people get confused that Trump he's not really changed the laws, but he's changed the regulations. So that's why a lot of us have hope with a different president in the future that hopefully some of these policies or some of these regulations can be rewritten or reverted to what they were, to kind of go back to the system that we had, which was not a perfect system, but it was working.
So when he's rewriting these things through executive orders and policy memorandums and everything else, I mean, we've seen this both on the employment side and the family side. What usually happens to these things in court, Allison?
There's always a lawsuit, and typically they end up losing because they're going against congressional intent. They're being arbitrary and capricious is the great term that we see in all these lawsuits. Even today, this happens. So there was the public charge rule, so being a public charge is always something that an incoming immigrant in certain categories had to prove that their petitioner, their sponsor could support them above the poverty guidelines, because they're not, certain propaganda pieces will tell you, oh, they're here on Medicare and they're on food stamps, they're getting free housing. None of that has ever been true because of these safeguards in place. So the Trump administration has sought to greatly expand that, where now they're not looking at solely the income or earning of the sponsor or petitioner, but they want to see what's your credit score, what debts do you have, what's your education level, are you fluent in English, what's everything you've ever done in your entire life financially, pretty much. That had been litigated. It was struck down temporarily. Then it was put back in place. And then there was another injunction. But throughout all of it today, it was struck down, which looks like pretty definitively, although there will be subsequent lawsuits to higher courts. So typically what happens with Trump is they try to do these things, but it's going against the congressional intent. It's going against the law, and they're exceeding their authority on the regulation, and then they don't end up winning. But what it does is it creates heartache, heartache, high blood pressure, and
headaches.
And I'm going to use these 3 H's. That's wonderful. But it does all of that. And what I think the true intent, at least in Trump's first and hopefully only term, is it is discouraging people from applying. It's turning people away. It's making them feel like this country doesn't want me. They're making all of these additional. So we're losing talent. We're losing people to other countries, or they just don't come in the first place. And that's going to cripple us for decades to come.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you. I mean, I've seen that as well, where you have a lot of workers who are in the US, whether they're on H-1B status or, some other status, where the Trump administration has made it very, very difficult to extend these statuses or obtain them in the first place, and it's so widespread, and it's really never happened to this level or extent before, that a lot of these workers are now like, you know what, the US doesn't want me. I mean, I think a lot of immigrants are feeling that way. I mean, the administration itself has gone after worker visas, H-1s, L-1s, J-1s, students on F-1s. I mean, students have contributed so much to this country over time, from an economic impact, from a knowledge standpoint, you name it, and culturally as well. And the administration has intentionally gone after those students, over the last 4 years in many different ways. And in speaking with people, I get the feeling, and I hate it, but they just don't, they're like, the US doesn't want me anymore, And we understand that the US is a melting pot. It always has been. That's why we are one of the greatest countries in the world, And so that perception, I think, is not something that's going to just go away. Even if the administration changes tomorrow or the next day, that perception is going to be lasting for quite some time, and it's not going to be just like hitting a button and erasing everything Trump has done. I mean, there's so many executive orders, so many bureaucratic pieces that were put in place with USCS and everything else. It's not like Biden can come in and just, say, okay, it's all gone, in 2 days or whatever. It's going to be there for a while, especially the perceptions piece that you brought up.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And so, Allison, you had mentioned the public charge. So with this most recent action that's happened, I mean, that kind of changes how we have even been acting for the last October. I know we submitted a lot of I-944s. Really, how has the public charge in this past year that it's been around, how or the recent changes in it, how has it affected your clients?
It really greatly has. There have been quite a few clients, or prospective clients, I should say, that had to be honest with them that even though, again, their petitioner, their sponsor earned above the prior threshold, when thresholds get raised and changed and you consider other factors, wouldn't have been strong candidates. And then, of course, you throw in the middle of a pandemic when a lot of cases we were filing weren't getting adjudicated because USCIS wasn't holding interviews. And I told quite a few people, well, let's give it a couple months. Let's get some data. Let's kind of see how these cases are going. We know how we can play up or strengthen your case. And those are probably people I'm never going to hear from again. As much as I can follow up and let them know that, like, hey, maybe this is gone, but what was their impression from meeting with someone to tell them, well, you qualify, you have a 21-year-old US citizen child and you have a lawful entry, you qualify to file this, but for this issue. I mean, hopefully a lot of them will, maybe they're following our page and they'll see this video and we'll do our best to reach out, but there's just been so many people that are just after the kind of sweat equity that they've put into being in this country and the taxes that they've paid, even if they've been undocumented or been documented and paying into a system for years and years, to be told in a consultation that, like, we don't know how this is going to go, but this is a very negative policy change in your case for these reasons. I mean, it's really heartbreaking that I think that all of us, immigration attorneys, we do this because we want to help people achieve their version of the American dream and whatever that is, and help people navigate this complicated process. And it's complicated regardless of who the president is, but we shouldn't have to be telling people, I don't think this is going to work for you. You're right now not on the government's radar. And maybe that's the best thing for you right now, just to stay off their radar and not, point out your status right now. Just kind of let things slide for a little bit and see what happens. I mean, that's a terrible thing for any attorney that wants to be doing this work, that wants to be helping people, to have to say and do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, in 1980, my dad decided to move from Canada to the US, to Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was 10 years old at the time. I think his green card process took about 5 or 6 days back in 1980, and then 5 years later, we filed for, naturalization, got that, and he did that for a reason. He thought this was a great country for his family to grow up in and his kids to achieve something, and I'm not saying Canada is a slouch. It's not. It's a great country as well, but the point being, that it was that quick and easy back then. I understand the population was lower, demographics were different back then. Everything was different, but still, I'm not saying it should be that easy now, but all these roadblocks that the Trump administration, put into place is clearly making it seem like, well, we don't, as a country, want you, and that perception is not so good. I mean, I can go into prevailing wages, what just happened a week and a half ago for H-1B workers, where they basically arbitrarily raised those wages by 30, 40%. Yet, is that reasonable during a pandemic when the economy's not so great? I mean, obviously it was done for a reason, and then now they're coming out and saying, all right, for the H-1B lottery, we're not going to have a lottery anymore. Basically, the only cases we're going to accept are the ones where the wages are really, really, really high, And from an economic standpoint, I run a business. I know people who run businesses, we have clients who run businesses, obviously, everybody should be treated fairly. But at some point, if the wage from the Department of Labor is so much higher than what a company actually even pays a US worker, that system's not going to work, you know? And it's intentionally made that way by the Trump administration for it not to work, you know, to try to reduce those numbers. And these things are going to get litigated, as Allison pointed out, but it's creating so much chaos is a good word.
Yeah.
You know? I think the Joker in The Dark Knight used the word chaos quite a bit.
Yeah.
You know, the chaos is good to achieve whatever the Joker was trying to achieve, you know? And I feel like this is kind of the same situation. The more chaos they can create within the immigration system, the more that the Trump administration and Stephen Miller are going to achieve what they want to achieve ultimately, which are cutting down the numbers. And it's unfortunate.
You know, it's interesting you make that point just about the increase in the fees in a different sense, but I was looking back, kind of doing some research for this, and from what I could find, I couldn't really get a solid thing but at the end of December 2016, as reportedly when USCIS had for the first time increased fees since November 2010, which I think is interesting because since I've been in immigration, it feels like, and even just in the past 3 years, that there has been at least 3 increases in fees. And correct me if I'm wrong, but with this most recent increase in fees, how do you see that affecting people and affecting businesses and family clients? You know, I know there's been an injunction recently that stopped it from happening on October 2nd, but in the event that it gets litigated and moves forward, what kind of barriers do you see that happening for people?
So, I mean, I think it depends like what process. The biggest issue, in my opinion, representing more individuals and not so much companies is not what is the fee, but is there availability of a fee waiver? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people out there that can pay these fees and do pay these fees, but there are a lot of people that can't. And fee waivers were almost always automatically granted in certain circumstances. If, for example, a client had a U.S. citizen child that was receiving like free school lunch, for example, because of a lower household income, you could get a fee waiver granted for whatever that parent needed immigration wise. Those are kind of gone. Those are so rarely granted that I just typically tell my clients, when you file it with the fee waiver, if it's rejected, they send the whole package back and we lose about a month or 2, and then you still have to get the fee together. So if you can figure this out, if you can talk to friends and borrow the money, you're better off doing that, because then at least we know that we're going to get the case receipted and it'll be adjudicated a little bit sooner. So again, it's putting me in that position, not where I'm the bad guy. It's not more money in my pocket at all, but it's telling someone, I know that you can't really afford this, but the government's not going to give this to you and you have to figure it out. And you need to, again, scrimp. And I mean, I've had clients that go to their church for collections that have to get loans from family members, or sometimes they have to get loans from not so reputable people and end up paying a huge, interest fee just to be able to get this benefit that they qualify for and can apply for. So again, the fees, I don't know, I don't track that enough. I mean, a lot of the fees went up very marginally. We weren't seeing huge increases in a lot of these issues. And USCIS being fee funded, I personally believe, the fees do need to cover the cost of the agency, right? It's not they don't receive taxpayer dollars, but the issue is, how is that agency spending the money? Because there was a couple senators that did an investigation when USCIS was about to not declare bankruptcy, but they were about to do that big layoff. And they said, wait a second, you had a surplus last year. So why are you saying you're out of money? Well, they claimed they were out of money because they were putting so many more resources into fraud investigations. They're taking more time to look into marriage-based fraud and immigration fraud, instead of just adjudicating the cases that are prepared for them. So it's not about what the fees are, because the fees do need to fund the agency, but it's how are you allocating those resources and what witch hunts are you going after that aren't really problems that exist in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely that. And I would add one more thing to that, which is from the employment side, the fees haven't gone up significantly. Obviously, other than the premium processing fee that went up to $2,500, which again, I think companies can pay that, to get a quick result. It's what is the USCIS delivering for those fees, and this is related to what Allison was saying, but something a little different, which is if they ask companies or individuals to pay more fees, they would expect better service, right? You know, and so from a service standpoint, we don't see that service getting any better. In fact, the service is getting worse year by year, you know, and for example, an H-1B regular non-premium process case right now can take 12 to 14 months. I mean, that's ridiculous, but the fees are going up, you know, and we're seeing this really across the board where even though the fees are going up because they're a funded agency, a fee-funded agency, where's the delivery of the service, right? And we're not seeing that, you know, and I think a lot of people will notice that. And that's one significant area we've seen deteriorate over the last 4 years. Things are just taking longer and longer and longer. That goes back to what we're all saying, you know, in this video, which is little by little, they've been destroying different pieces of the immigration system on purpose, you know, and it's unfortunate, but it's what we see. And I think a lot of immigration lawyers and law firms have seen that as well.
It's an interesting combination of things because I think what we've heard is that, you know, typically USCIS officers only get a certain amount of time to look at a case. So that in conjunction with, you know, higher fees, but they were going to like furlough, but then they still don't even have enough time to look over stuff. It seems to be a whole cesspool of bad stuff going on.
Yeah, but at the same time, I do want to acknowledge that this COVID situation has added to that. And that has nothing to do with, you know, what the administration or the USCIS is doing. That has made things more difficult. I mean, whether it's government, whether it's individuals, it doesn't matter. That's a tough situation that has added to it. Mm-hmm. But the foundation of what was there before COVID happened was set in place, you know, and this COVID just made it worse.
Well, I think that COVID finally became the excuse to like fully eliminate all semblances of transparency and cooperation. So a couple things like that just have assisted us. So we're talking about processing times getting a lot longer, you know, the quality of kind of the service you're receiving going down. So there used to be this thing called InfoPass. And InfoPass were appointments that you could schedule online to go to your local office to ask questions about a case. Now, really to ask any question, you know, it's a face-to-face you get with the USCIS officer. Now, of course, in our office, we would seldom need to do that because we're attorneys filing cases. We know what we're doing. But every once in a while, there's an oddity with a particular case, or you need to straighten something out or clarify something. So it was a great tool that we had. We could show up with the client, we could show up by ourselves and just straighten things out. So InfoPass still exists, but now the only way to get one is by calling USCIS. It typically takes at least about half an hour on the phone to kind of wait on hold, talk to the person. You have to explain why you need the InfoPass. They determine over the phone whether or not you're worthy of an appointment, and then they'll call you back 48 to 72 hours later to schedule you the appointment. So we can't even do those for our clients anymore because if, you know, we don't know our client's availability for an appointment, they're the ones that need to show up. And it just has created another avenue where we used to just be able to go online, make an appointment and show up. You know, and another thing that they've done that has really kind of driven me crazy, we've always had a great relationship with our local field office. In our office, I've been practicing there for 8 years. I know most of the officers, the field office director is pretty great. They used to hold quarterly meetings with AILA attorneys just to provide updates, let us know their policies and procedures, how they prefer to do things, just to kind of, again, streamline, make it easier on the attorneys. It's easier on the clients. Everything gets taken care of more quickly. Everyone's happy, right? They're happy because we're filing things how they want. Clients are happy because things are done quickly. We're happy because we don't have to be the go-between. Trump administration got rid of those. They are no longer allowed to hold those meetings, and they haven't held any, I believe, since about mid-2017. So we're not getting the communication. We're not hearing from them. There used to be a liaison position with AILA where, again, if you had an issue, you could submit a ticket through AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, that we're all members, and you could work one-on-one with someone at the local office to help resolve. They don't do that anymore. You know, they're finding every way. So fees are going up, but these services are going down. They're giving us less time. And it's not the decision of the local office. You know, those are still the same people we knew under prior administrations, and they're still wonderful. It's these higher ups, it's these Stephen Millers, and you know, they're doing everything in their power to make things because people call me all the time. My case has been pending for 3 years. What do I do? You're an attorney. Can I hire you to fix it? And unfortunately, I have to say no. Like, I mean, there are certain things we can do. We can look into law. Yeah, there maybe, but I can't just call USCIS on your behalf and get a decision on your case if it were that easy. I mean, but so there's just so much that's happening and really not happening, and the transparency, just everything is gone now. And it just makes everyone's lives more difficult. And the quality of the service is just non-existent right now.
I think you make
yeah, and it makes our lives more difficult as well, as immigration attorneys, because, and I think there probably is a higher burnout rate in the immigration field over the last 4 years than ever before. And I believe the main reason for that, obviously, are some of these things we've been talking about over this video conversation, but it's hard for us to actually, we feel powerless sometimes because of the system. And, our goal is actually to try to help our clients, achieve what they want to do, which is achieve the American dream, And because we feel powerless, we go back to the headache, heartache, high blood pressure, 3 H's idea, and that's very, very difficult for us to deal with, but having said that, we do the best job we can, through all of this. But we do feel for our clients. I mean, there's so many things that have happened over the last, 4 years from an immigration standpoint that obviously we disagree with. There is one thing that happened that I actually agree with, which is the H-1B cap. The lottery system changed to make it a pre-registration, first. And then if you get selected, then you file the case. I think that's the only thing that, in my opinion, is more efficient from an immigration standpoint, because that saves a lot of money for companies, a lot of time for companies, a lot of time for employees and law firms as well. But that's about it, Haley, I think, over the 4 years.
I think that I feel like if that's the only thing, it just makes me wonder if there's
something beneath the sea.
Subversive way that it's going to be used to make our lives harder. That's my only thing, is that it is the one good thing, but then it's oh, is it bad because everything else hasn't been all that great?
I'll tell you what that potential issue is. Okay. By changing the lottery system the way they did it, now they can actually add and change it one more time, which they're proposing to do now, which I discussed earlier, which is forget the lottery altogether. We're just going to go pick the cases with the highest wages, And again, I mean, that's a topic for a different day. Everyone wants to get paid the highest wages possible. That's all fine, but does it make sense within an industry, with US workers and foreign workers and everything else? That's a more complicated issue. And so once you change something a little bit, you tweak it a little bit once, you can tweak it again a little bit easier. And that's exactly what I think.
And I think too, if they go to that model, they're rewarding bigger companies that can afford that, and they're punishing smaller tech startup, these smaller companies that can maybe only petition 1 or 2 H-1B workers, and it's going to wipe out. I mean, how many companies rely? It can cause a lot more problems than it.
Yeah, it's completely. And this is where they're not thinking it through, or they're thinking it through with the intention that we don't agree with, obviously, but the small to mid-sized companies, if all of these rules went into place, without being defeated in litigation, forget it. I mean, they can't pay the same wages as Microsoft, and so to me, you're destroying so much of our industry. I mean, a lot of innovation comes from our small to mid-sized businesses, and those businesses create workers who have their own ideas, who want to go out and actually create their own business, and do good for the country and hire workers. I mean, what are we going to do? Have this policy to where there are no more Elon Musks of the world, in the US? They're going to go somewhere else. They're going to go somewhere else and create a company somewhere else, employ thousands of workers or hundreds of workers somewhere else, and someone else is going to benefit from this, and this is not what our country is about. I mean, our country is about innovation. It's about creativity. It's about passion, There are lots of things, and we are actually doing everything we can, as a country over the last number of years to wipe all of those things out. And there will be a price to pay for that. The world is not the same way the world was 20 years ago. There are other places where you can actually live, create jobs, and be an entrepreneur or live a good life, contribute economically. And so there's a ripple effect of this that I think the U.S. is going to feel for a while, no matter who wins.
I think you make a good point. I think it's a systematic elimination where there isn't an avenue for those who are entrepreneurs. There's reducing avenues for students. They're now eliminating, a lot of the small business, medium-sized businesses to now it's really going to be concentrated in the larger businesses. So it'll be interesting to see what could happen. But kind of going back to one of the first things that this Trump administration said it would do, which was a path to citizenship for dreamers. However, I feel like we've been seeing the opposite, which is actually phasing out of DACA and no path has been put into place, as well as cancellation of TPS for many countries. Allison, how have you seen about that, and kind of how has that affected your clients?
So the fact I was not aware up until we were prepping for this call that he put that in his first State of the Union, because by January 2018, Trump had already moved to eliminate the DACA program. So to say that you want to create a pathway for these dreamers whose legal status you're eliminating, I mean, it's madness. He never tried to do that. Again, in those first 2 years he was president, he had control. Senate and House was Republican controlled. They could have passed anything immigration related that they wanted to, and they didn't, because Republicans do not support a pathway of citizenship for dreamers. They never have. Maybe there's been a handful that supported it, but the DREAM Act has been around, since 2008? And they're still using these kids as pawns on both sides. I mean, I'm not going to absolve Democrats either, but they're still being used as pawns. So Trump doesn't care. He doesn't care about dreamers. He doesn't care about TPS. There's, hundreds of thousands of people here with TPS who's set to expire in January. And I keep getting calls and emails. What do we do? How can we renew our permits? It's like, depends who wins the White House. Because the president has authority to continue these programs, and he's choosing not to. The Supreme Court ruled on DACA, and the Supreme Court said, now they didn't necessarily uphold the constitutionality of DACA. They said the way the Trump administration tried to revoke it was, again, arbitrary and capricious, which is much like everything that Trump tries to do with immigration. So it stands for now. What was the Trump administration's response to that? They're still not allowing new initial applicants. So people that still meet those initial requirements still are not allowed to apply. They reduced the period of DACA from 2 years to 1 year. So now these poor kids have to shell out $495 every year to renew their status instead of every 2 years. He has the power to do something here. He claims in 2018 he wanted to, but all he's doing is eliminating and reducing, and he doesn't want, I believe, I don't know the estimates of numbers. I think it's somewhere like 250,000 dreamers in the country. Does that sound right? I don't know. But however many, if they had a pathway to citizenship, how many do you think are actually going to vote for the Republican Party and him? Not very many, the way that the Republican Party has treated immigrants the last decade or so. So, he's going to say things, but he's never going to try to do anything about that, because he'd be solidifying more votes for the opposite party. So, just everything that comes out of his mouth is not believable, really. I mean, like I said, his actions have spoken louder. Unfortunately with TPS, there was a lawsuit that was putting the removal of TPS for certain countries on hold, and that unfortunately was decided last month or 2 months ago. So all for TPS for El Salvador, Honduras, I believe Haiti, and a few other countries is all set to expire in January. And what are these people going to do? A lot of them have been in the country for 2 decades. And what's going to happen? We simply don't know yet. And that's why I'm encouraging as many people. I mean, we've got election day tomorrow. If you have U.S. citizen loved ones out there, please go vote. Obviously I care who I voted for, and I think that's obvious through this conversation, but just exercising the right to vote. There's too many people in this country who don't do that. We have so many, less than half of eligible voters voted in the 2016 election. And that was telling as to why we are in the situation that we are now. So, if you know someone with DACA, someone with TPS, the result of the election is crucial to the future of those individuals and what's going to happen with them.
All right, in all fairness, I'll add one thing to what you're saying. Back when Obama was president, he also had a Democrat House and a Democrat Senate for the first 2 years, and they didn't touch immigration at all, And I remember back then, telling clients, this is going to be great. They're going to do immigration reform. President Obama will take care of it. He's got everybody on his side, nothing happened, And so a part of this conversation, you talk about Democrats, Republicans, it's not as much of a party issue. Now, what Trump is doing is different. He's trying to reduce immigration altogether. That's a different conversation. Well, actually, it's the conversation we're having now. But Democrats could have done something about it. Republicans could have done something about it. I remember George W. Bush, wanted immigration reform. He put a plan in place. Republicans didn't want it because they didn't like him. I mean, the whole thing across the board has been really unfortunate, because I feel like immigrants and immigration are just pawns in this huge political game for power, And so we have to navigate through it and do the best we can for our clients. But I feel bad, honestly, that we should have immigration reform, do it reasonably, but it should have been done by now, and maybe this is coming to something you're going to probably say at the end, Haley, but as far as what do we think is going to happen, but it needs to happen. It'll help the country quite a bit.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. And then, with that, I know I feel like there's so much that we didn't cover, but kind of as a final thought, and you can tie this into your final thoughts. If Trump were to win, what do you think will happen? And if Biden is to win, what do you think will happen? And either one can go.
Go ahead, Allison.
I mean, if Trump wins, it's going to get a lot worse. Stephen Miller outlined his plan over the weekend. Just more policy changes. I mean, our system is going to screech to a halt. Even if Dems take control of the Senate, because any legislation they pass, of course, will be vetoed, and they won't have enough to be veto proof and override it. So immigration is in our system as we know it is going to be non-existent over the next 4 years. And talking about, the future ramifications for decades to come, it's going to be what's already happened is going to, affect us for decades to come, but even more so. If Biden wins, I mean, we don't really know. He's not really said that much. He's not put that much out there on immigration. I tell my clients that I think we have a decent idea. I started practicing under the Obama administration, so I think we have a decent idea because he was vice president under Obama. He has thankfully spoken out. We haven't touched on asylum and family separation and any of that, which is a whole other can of worms. But he has, kind of condemned that, said in his last debate that was the wrong choice on the family detention and things like that. So hopefully, Obama was not my favorite president when it came to immigration, and he did a lot of pretty terrible things to a lot of people. But the priority system from a deportation standpoint, that was one good thing. That was one thing that I could kind of get behind, because it reallocated resources, and it really helped distinguish, your 65-year-old grandma who hopped the border 20 years ago and has been, or 40 years ago and has been here ever since. It didn't make her a priority, but it made your drug smuggler down the street a priority. And I can get behind something like that. So again, we don't know that Biden is going to follow a similar path. He's talked about, reversing some of the regulations that Trump has done, ending family detention, which are all great things. I think only time will tell, and we'll kind of have to see, but it definitely won't get worse if Biden is in office. That's for sure. It's going to take some time. It's not going to be overnight. Whether or not we get the results of the election tomorrow night or Wednesday or later on in the week, it's not going to overnight fix anything, but at least it could be a start.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I mean, I'll add the asylum piece. I mean, obviously the administration has basically shut that down, Allison, right? And I believe that'll even get worse, under the second 4 years for Trump, should he win. I've talked to some folks and they say, well, you know what, if Trump wins, because it'll be his last term, that things are going to be different. He might not do some of the things with immigration that he did in the first 4 terms. And I tell them, I don't think that's right. This isn't a political ploy. This is actually something that they believe needs to happen, which is reducing immigration to the US, And so I agree with you. I think things will get worse. I think the Trump administration will limit asylum, I think they'll considerably limit like professional work visas or work visas in general, like the H-1B, or L1, J1s, F1s. I mean, F1s, they've already gone over after international students over and over and over again, with, well, you can't take online classes during a pandemic, which got shot down, of course, in court, ridiculous things where they put pressure on these, these areas. I think it'll definitely get worse. The perception is already worse, with this country and immigrants. Unfortunately, that's going to even get worse. And the damage is going to be devastating for the country from an economic standpoint. I truly believe that, immigrants do contribute quite a bit to this country, as do US workers or anybody who's living in this country, And so that's what I see with, if Biden were to win, I wish I could sit here and say everything will be better from an immigration standpoint. I just can't, simply because under President Obama, he had the chance, he didn't do it, and Biden was his VP, and I just don't know from a political standpoint how much capital they have to actually go and focus on immigration right away. There's so many other things that they're going to be focusing on. I think it'll be better than under Trump, obviously, as you mentioned, Allison. And I hope it would be more of a humane, whatever they do, I would hope it'd be more just humane from a perception standpoint and from a policy standpoint and an execution of that policy standpoint, and make things better for everyone. But between the two, obviously, I would imagine that the Biden administration would be better for immigration than the Trump administration, because the Trump administration has been completely pathetic, for lack of a better word.
And I think, nevertheless, with whatever the outcome is, that's where we come in as immigration attorneys and as an immigration law firm, is that whatever does come, we'll be here to navigate the system and to be a pillar of support for our clients, because that is really what we're supposed to be, regardless of whatever the outcome is we're supposed to be there. And I think that, I hope that we can be that shining light, because, eventually it's going to come. We don't know what it will be.
That's right. And Haley's right. I mean, we can't, other than voting, we can't control, who wins and who loses, right? But immigration, is still going to be there. There are going to be people who still need help. There are people who are still going to need good representation, good, honest, caring representation, and I think that's, we provide that. And so whatever happens, we'll all do it with a positive attitude, and a nice smile, and try to help the best we can with the system that we are given.
Most definitely. Okay. Well, thank you both so much. Do you have any other final thoughts? You guys gave some really good answers today. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for setting us up.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, guys. When you join us with Bashyam Shah, don't forget you can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. You can also sign up for our newsletter. It comes out weekly on Monday at noon. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful day.
Take care. Bye.